Imagine history's most radical, fiery revolutionary. Like a man whose very name translates to the zealous one.
Right.
A figure associated by ancient historians with, violent uprisings, insurgency, just untamed, explosive passion.
Absolutely.
Now imagine that in the greatest, most widely read story ever told about him, he never speaks a single word.
Yeah, it's wild.
It really is. Today we are looking at the ultimate paradox of Simon the Zealot. We're jumping into this deeply layered text called The 12 Apostles and Freemasonry, Chapter 12, Simon.
A fascinating text.
Oh, completely. And our mission today is to explore a tension that you have almost certainly felt in your own life, like when you're completely consumed by an idea, a new pursuit, a profound belief, a sudden overwhelming drive. You get that physical sensation of heat in your chest.
You literally feel it.
Exactly. The question is, how do we take that raw, intense, almost dangerous energy and channel it so it illuminates our path rather than burning our lives down?
Yeah, that tension is basically the core of human ambition, right? Unchecked, the exact same fire that fuels a massive achievement, it can completely destroy a person's foundation.
Oh, 100%.
What makes this specific text so remarkable is that it doesn't just give a historical biography. It takes what most people assume is just this straightforward biblical footnote and cracks it wide open.
Yeah.
It weaves together the canonical Gospels, ancient alchemical traditions, astrology, and Masonic philosophy to build this comprehensive framework for how a person actually harnesses their inner fire.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the philosophy, we kind of have to look at the man who inspired it.
Right, the historical guy.
Yeah, because if you grew up going to Sunday school, you might vaguely remember the name Simon the Zealot, but he is arguably one of the most obscure figures in the New Testament.
Definitely.
The source text points out the slight variations in how he's introduced. In Luke 6.15, he's called Simon called Zealots, but in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, he's referred to as the Canaanite.
Right, and we should clarify that.
Oh, yeah. The text is quick to clarify that Canaanite in this context has absolutely nothing to do with geography. Like, it's not where he's from.
Exactly.
It actually derives from the Aramaic word quanon, which literally translates to the zealous one.
And that label carries massive historical and psychological weight. The text highlights a pretty significant debate among scholars about what that zeal actually looked like in practice.
Because it could mean very different things.
Exactly. On one side of the spectrum, you have ancient historians like Josephus. Now, Josephus describes the Zealots as an official, highly radical political sect.
Like actual insurgents?
Right. Insurgents who were actively and violently resisting the Roman occupation of first-century Judea. If you follow that historical thread, Simon is a militant. He's a guy carrying a dagger under his cloak.
Wow.
But then on the other hand, you have modern scholars like Bart Ehrman who suggest the term might not imply political violence at all. Yeah, Ehrman suggests it might just mean an intense, fervent religious devotion to the law. And I want to be clear here, the text just presents both these viewpoints. We're not taking a side on which historical account is definitively right. We're just reporting what the sources say.
Right, of course. We're just looking at the text.
Right.
But regardless of whether his zeal was, political or purely spiritual, the underlying truth remains the same, doesn't it? The man is entirely defined by his intensity.
Yes, absolutely.
He's characterized as a person of absolute passion and unyielding principle. But here is the irony that completely reframes how we have to look at him.
This is my favorite part.
Despite having this fiery, potentially violent reputation as a radical, he does absolutely nothing in the narrative of the Gospels.
Nothing.
He doesn't deliver a soaring speech. He doesn't perform a single miracle. He's a total ghost.
What's fascinating here is how esoteric traditions interpret that exact silence.
Tell me more about that.
Well, in a superficial literal reading, his silence just makes him a minor background character, right?
Right. Like an extra in a movie.
Exactly. But in mystical frameworks, that silence is deeply profound. It represents pure, unharnessed potential energy.
Okay, I see.
He isn't a militant figure running around causing chaos in the story. He is a concentrated presence of fire that is just waiting to be directed.
He's like the quiet guy sitting in the back of the room wearing a radical revolutionary t-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
He's got all these intense burning beliefs, but he's just watching. He's holding it all in.
Perfectly said.
And that pent-up energy is reflected brilliantly in the traditional iconography of him, which the source text details. The imagery is incredibly dense.
It really is.
He's depicted as an older man with a beard, holding a book in one hand and a tall staff in the other. Above him, you have the all-seeing eye inside a glowing triangle.
Right.
Below him is the classic Masonic square and compass with the letter G. He's flanked by two pillars, one topped with a globe. And next to him are the astrological symbols for Venus and Mercury.
That's a huge detail.
And framing the entire portrait is an Ouroboros, the ancient symbol of a snake biting its own tail.
Yeah, and every single one of those elements is a mechanism for explaining how to manage passion. Take the astrological symbols, for instance.
Right.
You have this figure defined by martial, aggressive fire, but he is flanked by Venus, which represents love, harmony, and relationship.
Right.
And Mercury, which represents intellect, reason, and communication.
So it's not just blind rage.
Exactly. The iconography is telling you visually that raw zeal must be tempered by a loving heart and a rational mind. Otherwise, it just becomes blind destruction.
Wow.
The Ouroboros surrounding him reinforces this too. It represents the infinite cycle of destruction and rebirth.
That's incredible. The text also notes that, according to Christian tradition, Simon supposedly preached in Egypt and Persia and was ultimately martyred by being sawn in half.
A brutal way to go.
Yeah, awful. Because of this, his defining emblem is often a saw. But again, the text doesn't just leave it at the literal martyrdom. Esoterically, the saw represents the cutting power of truth.
It is an instrument of division, meticulously separating the false from the real, the permanent from the temporary.
It is a deliberate cutting action. If Simon is the embodiment of silent, raw potential, the saw is the tool that puts that energy to work.
Which makes sense.
Right. Which brings us to the central thesis of the text.
Mm.
How do you take a zealot and turn him into a spiritual master? How do you utilize that dangerous energy without letting it destroy you?
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text shifts entirely from the historical biblical man to what he represents symbolically, the alchemy of sacred fire.
Yes.
Drawing on the work of Carl Jung and ancient Hermetic traditions, the text explains that fire is a dual force. It's both destructive and creative. In alchemy, this is captured in the Latin phrase solve et coagula.
Yeah, and understanding the mechanics of solve et coagula is essential here. Solve means to dissolve or break down.
Like dissolving in water.
Sort of, but psychologically, this is the burning away of impurities. It is the painful destruction of the ego, the dismantling of your fears, and the incineration of the false narratives that hold you back in life.
Oh, wow. That sounds intense.
It is. You cannot bypass the solve.
Hmm.
But the second half is coagula, which means to bring together or coagulate. Once the false elements are burned away, the fire provides the heat necessary to forge your true, refined form.
It operates exactly like a controlled burn in a forest management scenario.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, like you absolutely need the destructive, terrifying fire to clear out the dead wood, the invasive species, and the thick brush blocking the sun.
Right?
If you don't intentionally let that fire burn through the forest floor, the new seeds physically cannot germinate and grow. But, and this is the big but, if you don't control the perimeter of that burn, you lose the entire forest to a wildfire.
That is a perfect illustration of the alchemical process, and the text elevates this controlled burn from a psychological concept to an actual divine connection.
How so? Well, it compares Simon's internal fire to Moses encountering the burning bush in the book of Exodus.
Oh, right.
The bush is engulfed in flames, but it isn't consumed by them. When zeal is accurately directed toward truth, it stops being a destructive political or emotional rage and becomes what the scholar Gershom Scholem refers to as the consuming flame of the Shekinah.
The Shekinah. Scholem defines this as God's indwelling presence in the world. So the fire isn't just a fleeting emotion or a burst of motivation. It's like a direct line to the divine.
Precisely. The source plunges even deeper into Kabbalistic cosmology here, bringing up the seraphim.
Okay, the angels.
Right. In the angelic hierarchy, the seraphim are the highest order of angels stationed directly at the throne of God. Their very name translates from Hebrew as the burning ones.
The burning ones. It's so metal.
It really is. They are beings composed entirely of pure, radiant fire. In this esoteric framework, Simon the Zealot is meant to be a human echo of the seraphim. If you spend time in proximity to ultimate truth, you will burn. His zeal for righteousness is transmuted into a steady flame of divine service.
So if Kabbalah gives us the theory of these burning ones, and alchemy gives us the process of the burn, astrology maps out the specific type of energy we're dealing with.
Yes, exactly.
The text aligns Simon directly with the planet Mars. And traditionally, when we think of Mars, we think of the god of war. We picture conflict, bloodshed, anger, and divisiveness.
Which is an accurate description of what the prominent astrologer Liz Green would categorize as the lower octave of Mars.
The lower octave.
Yeah. The lower octave is untempered reactive aggression. In our daily lives, it manifests as road rage.
Oh, yeah.
It's the impulse to get into a vitriolic screaming match on the internet. It is zeal without a master.
But the text argues for the higher form of that planet's energy. In its higher octave, Mars evolves into the archetype of the spiritual warrior.
Right.
It's still distinctly martial, it still has teeth and forward momentum, but it's highly disciplined, deeply courageous, and fiercely loyal to the light.
This is a crucial philosophical transition in the text. It moves the concept of the zealot away from physical warfare. Fighting Roman soldiers in the streets of first-century Judea, and redirects that exact same intensity toward the spiritual defense of the soul.
Yeah.
The source uses this wonderful evocative phrase, the knight of the flaming sword.
Oh, I like that.
As this knight, you aren't fighting physical enemies in the material world anymore. You are battling your own internal illusions. You are warring against your own complacency and inner resistance.
So if astrology gives us the map of this fiery martial energy, and alchemy gives us the theory of how it transforms, where is the actual practical laboratory where a person practices this?
Right, the application.
Yeah. The text points directly to the physical space and ritual structure of a Masonic lodge. Freemasonry is presented as an entire initiatory system dedicated to answering the question of how we put a boundary around the fire so it doesn't devolve into fanaticism.
The text explains that Simon reflects the raw initiatory fire required to even begin the pursuit of the craft. Think about the concept of the entered apprentice, the newest, most junior member of a Masonic lodge.
The new guy.
Exactly. When they first approach the door of the lodge, they arrive with pure intentions, a desire to improve themselves, and a massive amount of eager desire to seek light.
They are completely fired up. Like they have that initial zeal, that hunger to change their lives and uncover the mysteries of the universe right that very second.
And Simon embodies that exact first impulse. He's the urge to rise, to knock on the door, to seek out transformation. But the core Masonic lesson that the text highlights is that unchecked fire consumes, while directed fire illuminates.
That's a great line.
Freemasonry utilizes rigid ritual, rich symbolism, and the bounds of fraternity to temper the raw, chaotic passion of the outside world, what they call the profane world, into the focused, laser-like devotion of the initiate.
The text mentions that Simon symbolically represents the flaming sword that guards the gates of Eden in the book of Genesis. In the lodge setting, he's associated with the East, which is the seat of the worshipful master and the symbolic source of light. He acts as a spiritual Tyler.
Which is an interesting concept.
Yeah, now a Tyler in a physical Masonic lodge is the guard who stands outside the door with a drawn sword to keep out anyone who isn't a qualified member. So internally, Simon is this spiritual Tyler guarding the gateway to your soul.
Right.
He uses that iconic saw we talked about earlier to ruthlessly cut away illusion and keep profane, unworthy thoughts from entering your sacred mindset.
Exactly.
But I want to push back on this a bit.
Okay, go for it.
The text seems to suggest that they want these highly passionate, fiery individuals, but then they immediately put their zeal into a rigid box governed by strict rituals, specific chairs, and ancient rules. Wait, so they want highly passionate people, but then they immediately want to put their zeal in a box with strict rituals. Isn't that just suffocating their fire? Doesn't it kill the momentum of the zealot?
This raises an important question, and it addresses one of the most common misconceptions about esoteric discipline. There is a massive fundamental difference between suppression and containment.
How does the text differentiate the two? Because they sound similar.
Suppression is putting a heavy lid on a boiling pot until the pressure builds and it violently explodes. It is the act of denying your passion, pretending you don't have that fire, or shaming yourself for feeling intensely.
Right. That's never healthy.
Never. Containment, on the other hand, is building a highly specialized, heavy-duty engine block around a series of contained explosions.
Oh, wow.
You aren't stopping the explosions. You are structuring them so they can drive a vehicle forward at 100 miles an hour.
So it's like a blacksmith forging a blade. You absolutely require the extreme, chaotic heat of the forge to soften the steel.
Yes.
But if you don't pull that steel out and strike it with the rigid, rhythmic, calculated strikes of the hammer, you don't get a sword. You just end up with a useless puddle of melted metal on the floor.
That is exactly right. The lodge doesn't want to extinguish the fire. As the text notes, every fellowship relies on members with Simon's fire people who energize the growth and keep the spirit alive.
Because otherwise it gets stale.
Exactly. But to keep that fire from burning the house down, it must be ritually contained. The text introduces a brilliant concept from Kabbalah to explain the mechanism of this containment.
Tiferet.
Right, Tiferet. The text cites the scholar Arya Kaplan here, defining Tiferet as beauty, harmony, and the integration of opposites.
Yes. Tiferet is the metaphysical mechanism that tempers the fire. It's the heart-centered equilibrium that unites absolute strength with profound compassion and raw will with deep wisdom.
So it balances things out.
Perfectly. It takes the blazing, destructive heat of Mars and balances it perfectly so it radiates light that you can actually see by, rather than just heat that burns everything it touches. Simon the Zealot, in this tradition, is the archetype of the individual who has mastered Tiferet. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've navigated ancient historical rebellions, alchemical processes, Kabbalistic angels, and Masonic rituals.
We've covered a lot of ground.
A ton. But how do you actually apply the cutting power of Simon's saw to your own daily life without crossing the line into toxic fanaticism? The text distills this complex esoteric philosophy down into 3 highly actionable lessons for anyone on a personal or spiritual path.
Right, and the first lesson is that fire must be refined. Initial enthusiasm is just the starting line, nothing more.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Oh, we've all experienced this. Starting a new complex project or a rigorous physical routine with a massive burst of zeal, only to abandon it 3 weeks later when the novelty wears off and the real work begins.
Yeah, when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m.
Exactly. True alchemical transformation requires the rigorous discipline to keep the fire burning steadily day after day, long after the initial excitement fades.
It's the difference between the spark and the sustained heat of the coals. And the second lesson is that courage is a spiritual virtue. Simon demonstrates that fighting ignorance and complacency requires immense bravery. But as the Knight of the Flaming Sword, you aren't fighting with actual weapons, and you certainly aren't arguing with people in the comment sections of the internet.
No, please don't do that.
Right. You are fighting your own inner fears, your own biases, and your own ego, using light and perseverance as your weapons.
And the third lesson is perhaps the most challenging to accept in modern society. Destruction can be holy.
That's a tough pill to swallow for some people.
It is, because we are conditioned to view destruction as inherently negative or tragic. But the text firmly reminds us that tearing down falsehoods is a mandatory step in growth.
You have to clear the lot before you build the house.
Precisely. You simply cannot build the true temple of your character on a foundation of lies, cognitive dissonance, or toxic habits. You have to be willing to use the saw. You have to actively cut away the illusions you hold about yourself, even when it hurts.
You have to orchestrate the controlled burn in your own mind. You have to let the dead wood go so the new growth can catch the sun.
Beautifully said.
It is such an incredible, sweeping journey for one historical figure to take within a single text. We started with Simon the Zealot, a biblical figure burdened with a radical, potentially violent name, who remains a total ghost, completely silent in the narrative.
Right.
And we watched him transform. He became the alchemical fire of Mars, the human echo of the burning seraphim, and finally the Masonic guardian of the East, holding the saw of truth. The core takeaway from all these sources is the beautiful, fragile necessity of balancing holy destruction with disciplined illumination. You must have both to grow.
You absolutely do.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text leaves us with something quite profound to consider.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we've spent this entire deep dive analyzing the dangers of unchecked fire and the absolute necessity of controlling our zeal. We've praised discipline, ritual, and containment.
Yeah.
But what happens if we lose our fire entirely? Is a cold, passionless, purely intellectual pursuit of truth actually more dangerous to the soul than an unrefined, burning fanaticism?
Man, that is the ultimate question, isn't it? Is it better to burn too bright and risk the wildfire, or is the utter absence of heat just a different, quieter kind of death?
Exactly.
That is definitely something to chew on as you go about your day. I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the esoteric history of Simon the Zealot. Keep tending to your inner fire, keep seeking the light, and remember, when you feel that raw, intense, completely consuming heat in your chest, wait, no ellipses. When you feel that raw, intense heat in your chest, don't panic. Just make sure you are the one holding the reins. We'll catch you on the next one.